Good. Hello, everyone. Very pleased to be here. I'm happy, sensitive, delighted, everything. I'm coming from a very different environment. I come directly from Morocco, where I was hosting an academy for cities in Africa on the same topic on nature-positive cities. And now I am here surrounded by snow, different nature, different weather, but it makes me reconnect with nature and understand how diverse and important and valuable are every efforts in every city with different challenges and different climates. So today I am going to speak about a project that is part of the World Economic Forum. Before that, I wanted to share with you who I am. I am from Colombia. I am from Bogota. I am very passionate about biodiversity. I worked during a lot of years in protected areas, declaring protected areas for biodiversity, working on biodiversity hotspots, mainly in the tropics. And after working many years in those rural areas and specializing in rural development, I realized that no matter how much effort I was putting in those rural areas, the biodiversity outcomes and biodiversity loss was still happening. And I shifted to work in cities, because if we don't work with city governments, if we don't work with citizens, if we don't work with urban-related industries that are hubs of production and consumption and highly dependent on nature elsewhere and biodiversity hotspots elsewhere, it will be very difficult to stop biodiversity loss. So I shift my passion towards cities. So I'm not working anymore with jaguars and jaguar corridors and camera trapping, but I am working with citizens and city officials to understand the deep connections that we have from an urban perspective on biodiversity elsewhere, how we are not only very importantly connected with nature in the built environment, but how we are also connected and subsidized by nature that comes from outside, how cities and countries are importing nature to maintain a minimum well-being in the urban environments and in the countries. I will start with a very short, no, the video is not there anymore. It was a video, but I can share it later. Again, I am part of the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum, you might know well, is an international organization that started as an event in January in Davos in Switzerland to bring together heads of state, to bring together CEOs of companies, and to start a conversation around common issues that can be resolved by that close collaboration. Then including, of course, civil society and academia, mapping what are the greatest global issues and then defining solutions and concrete commitments to advance in these issues and challenges. The World Economic Forum is divided in 10 centers. We call it thematic centers, and these centers deal with, again, the global issues. So more of a sectoral approach to the global agenda, advanced manufacturing, trade and commerce, financial and monetary systems, and a newly created center at the World Economic Forum is the Center for Urban Transformation. And it's a center that wants to understand how those global issues are represented and are accumulated at the urban scale, and how cities are clearly at the forefront of a lot of global challenges, and how cities can change the course of biodiversity loss, can change the course of inequality, can change the course of a lot of the geopolitical, social, economic issues that the world is currently living. Of course, knowing that 3/4 of the population will live in cities very soon. Of course, knowing that cities are expanding super fast. Just in the next 20, 30 years, urban areas are going to expand in more than 1.5 billion hectares, meaning around the size of South Africa, around the size of Peru, of new urban area in the world. This means land use change. This means resource extraction that is going to climb exponentially, more than 80% of augmentation in this resource extraction to guarantee the urban living is going to happen in the next 30 years. So tracking these dependencies is important because yes, we want to live in cities, we want to provide well-being in cities, but we need to understand within our little realms of well-being, what is permitting this well-being, what is subsidizing us, what is supporting us. The Center for Urban Transformation has 3 main aims: improving quality of life. We call it enabling net zero nature positive cities, which is an approach on sustainability and resilience in the urban environment. And the third one has to do with local economies. All these come together in different initiatives, one of which is the Nature-postive Cities Initiative, and I will explain in a bit why and how these emerged as a global agenda with different governments. I just wanted to stop here, and I usually use this as part of the video, and is because I feel that we often forget, again, the dependencies that we have on nature, and everything, the lunch that we just have, anything that we touch now comes from nature. We cannot afford keeping this impact on nature. We cannot afford not tracking the impact of nature, and we cannot afford this urban development that is coming at the expense of nature. Not only because it's a cost for the biodiversity and nature itself, but because it has a feedback loop. We affect nature, and this feedback loop of nature loss is affecting local economies, is affecting cities in return. One of our latest analyses said that 44% of global GDP of cities is at risk from nature loss. So there is a connection in economic development and nature loss. And of course, this is not leaving aside the social, impacts on nature loss as well. I like very much this graph that that stresses what I'm saying, and is that no SDG can be met if we don't focus on environmental targets and environmental outputs. No societal, including the city's objective and the city's SDG, economical SDG, none of them can be met if we don't focus on meeting nature targets. And this is hard in a world with such a complex situation, social inequality, lack of education, not access to clean water. But if we manage to put a lens of nature in all of this, if we manage to show that nature is actually a solution to all of these aspects, we can advance in a more sustainable approach towards nature. I was sharing with you, all these are Finnish endemic species, and I am a bird watcher and I love species, and I would love to have more time to do bird watching, but maybe I will come with more time in a couple of months. Again, 44% of global GDPs of cities is at risk of disruption from nature loss. So it's not only an economic objective and target to protect nature, it's also a moral target to protect nature. Nature provides also spiritual values and different kind of values that we should be mapping and we should be advocating for. All this sentiment, all this narrative is the basis of the Nature-postive Cities initiative that started last year in September, was launched by the World Economic Forum, but it's built on the legacy of the Biodiverse Cities initiative that started in Colombia. That initiative started in 2018. We started to work with 14 cities, such as the pilot that you're doing in Lahti, cities that really wanted to understand how they can reincorporate nature in their own city, but also how to track progress on this restorative approach to nature. After having this track record of working with 14 cities in Colombia, we presented this work in Davos, in the World Economic Forum in 2019. And this is where there was a global agreement and a common agreement that this project has to be a global project. And I started to lead that project last year, first as a fellow endorsed by the government of Colombia, and then I came to Europe to live in Geneva, very big change for me, a small city compared to Bogota, but connecting with other cities that were committed to this process, to this transition. Basically the spirit of this initiative within the World Economic Forum is not only to work in the nature agenda with the cities, but to show that we need to level the nature agenda with the climate agenda. There was a very strong work already happening on decarbonizing cities, on decarbonizing urban-related industries, on measuring mitigation efforts, but the work on adaptation, the work on nature, and the targets for nature were not as evident. So this is a process where we know that it's very important to keep on working with the climate agenda, but it's equally important to work with the nature agenda, with biodiversity, and to, as we were speaking with Hannah some minutes ago, to work on this climate-nature nexus, to understand that they are mutually interdependent, that nature is a solution for climate action, and that we need to start talking and working together and not in silos. A lot of the work that we're doing is also to map how those silos are being represented in governments, for example. Like in Germany, there's a Ministry for Climate and a Ministry for Natural Resources. How about joining forces and building new ministries, new institutions, new governance arrangements that bring together both agendas? Because if we have them separately, it means that we have separate targets. It means that we have separate KPIs. It means that we have separate priorities and competing priorities, because this is how we measure performance, right, with targets. So is part of our effort is bringing together these two agendas. And again, the rationale behind this is there's a lot happening in the climate agenda. We can see this, I know, sorry. We can see this, for example, how advanced is the climate agenda for cities. And again, we work as the World Economic Forum bridging private and public sector. So in this case, the climate agenda and the progress tracking towards climate in cities was very much completed by frameworks that already exist. So for climate, for the private sector, we have the science-based targets. The private sector can easily track their dependencies, their impacts, and their commitment towards climate. For the public sector, we have a clear agreement with NDCs, with national determined contributions. We have the science-based targets for climate in cities. But for nature, we are, and you see like the difference, almost a decade on the agenda. And this is the track, and this is the gap that we're trying to address. This is what we want to focus on so that we can complete that map and we can bring together both agendas. So there's some recommendations around science-based targets for nature in the private sector. Still in development, still in progress. There is the Montreal Agreement that was signed in Montreal in December 2022 with clear targets for biodiversity for the public sector. But then at the urban level, there are no nature-related targets. And we're starting a process that was launched in a workshop in Cambridge in December with different organizations, the United Nations Environment Programme, and other partners, to really understand what do we need to achieve a clear, coherent vision on the targets for nature in cities. And I think this is a great opportunity, and that's why I'm so excited to be here, because I know that Finland is advancing in this at the national level. How about bringing your experience? How about bringing all that universities are already doing in terms of developing a framework to track the nature-positive transitions in a city and bringing to the world and not replicating efforts. So this is just the beginning of a collaboration opportunity that I see both with Finland and with the cities that are piloting these efforts like Lahti. Again, the Nature-Positive Cities initiative is centered around three core pillars. The first one is to inspire a nature-positive urban development. What we mean by that is that we really need to increase literacy around nature. Not all the departments in cities are necessarily connected with how nature can support the urban development processes. What is the connection with health and nature? That I was talking with someone here at lunch that has a very interesting project on nature prescription. I think that this connection, making this connection evident and working with hospitals and knowing that nature definitely can act as a medicine. And the avoided costs of having nature in a city for the health sector are are fundamental and have to be screened. But this is not evident for a lot of governance. This is not evident for a lot of sectors. So how we use platforms like the World Economic Forum to bring this agenda forward, to inspire, to showcase these projects, for example, to write agenda blogs, to bring it to the summits, and to start talking about this every day in every meeting, to sound very, very repetitive, but through repetition, we make it normal. Then the second is, again, driving public-private collaboration. A lot of these efforts that cities have and a lot of the agendas and the targets fall into the city government. And the city government bears the burden of having to comply with all of these targets. So one of the key questions that we're trying to solve is what is the role of the private sector in supporting cities to achieve those targets? Because the private sector can support, can contribute, and also has a role to play. They are as well committed with this nature agenda. But if there is not a clarity on how they are contributing, how can we measure their contribution, and what can be the return on investment of their contribution, then we are not achieving the real collaboration. So again, it's working on bridging the gap between public and private, and then having concrete solutions. It's not only about talking in global summits, it's not only about prescribing public-private collaboration, but really to detecting what are those solutions and key projects that are being developed in different parts of the world and that do cross-pollination and sharing, because again, we're not reinventing the wheel, and I will explain later that a lot of the nature-positive projects are already being implemented. This is a new word that we're putting to efforts that are benefiting nature. But it's not that we have to now develop a big portfolio of new projects. What we have to do is to understand how those projects can be part of a taxonomy that can be related with the outcomes, positive outcomes for nature in these projects. How do we achieve all this kind of general agenda with 5 very concrete aims? So the first one is that we are establishing a shared definition of what does it mean to be a nature-positive city. And I know that this country and the City of Lahti are in this process as well. We want to understand what does it mean first to be nature-positive, because nature-positive was anchored in the Montreal Agreement in December as a key concept to achieve harmony with nature. But what does it mean to be nature positive? We don't want further greenwashing about everything is nature positive or everything related with tree planting is nature positive. No. We really want to describe what is nature positive, meaning that is not avoiding harm, is restoring nature. It has to have a component and an ingredient of reciprocity. We need to understand that it's not enough stopping the impact of nature. We need to have a restorative approach to nature. We need to give back. So this definition takes time because there's no a clear alignment on what does it mean to be nature positive overall as a big concept. And then nature positive cities is even a more niche approach. So what does it mean that for a city to be nature positive, for a city to start a transition so it can understand their impacts and dependencies on nature, stop the negative impacts, and then restore nature to receive concrete returns on that on that investment, on restoration. And then when we talk about enablers for nature-positive cities, these are not nature-related approaches. These have to do, for example, with what are the governance arrangements, as I was saying, so that a city can start working on this. What we're doing with different cities around the world is understanding and mapping how is the city whole organized. What are the units in charge of nature stewardship or the management of biodiversity? Sometimes there are not even units in charge of biodiversity management. It's more at the national level. There are departments perhaps of natural resources management or departments of land use. So an enabler for us is understanding who is in charge of the decision-making related with nature in a city government. Another enabler has to do, for example, with policies and incentives. There are some policies in place that are clearly hindering or impeding the process of nature positive. That is not nature related. So I come now from a deep dive that we had with Durban in South Africa. is a city that is in this process of mapping to what extent they are nature positive. And in terms of enablers for nature positivity, what we're doing is mapping what are the units in charge of the management of nature in the city. Then what are the policies and regulations that are supporting this restorative approach to nature, but also what are the ones that are affecting this restorative approach to nature. And we found out that they have a housing department that has a concrete target, which is building 5,000 cities in the next 2 years, no matter what, no matter where. And this target is generating an encroachment or an affectation of biodiversity hotspots and highly ecologically valuable areas of the city, because the biggest priority is to provide housing. So how we can find competing priorities where a housing department has a target that is clearly going in contradiction with the target of protecting biodiversity hotspots and protecting green areas in the city. So these contradictory policies and disincentives are part of this exercise of mapping what are the barriers to nature-positive cities. In this case, it's not directly related with an investment or a nature-related topic, but is clearly connected with this nature-positive transition. Then, once we map all this, we start developing clear guidelines and actions to this transition. So in this case, one guideline and action is clearly, we have a barrier, which is competing targets between the housing department and the natural resources department. The action is to build a committee so that there is a land use approach, a land approach and urban development approach that takes into account the layer of environmentally valuable areas of the city, and then we prioritize the housing projects according and with the lens of nature. And this is just an example on how, after this mapping approach, we plan some concrete actions to advance in this progress and really avoid nature loss from the city perspective, and then increase funding and restoration actions towards the ecosystems on which the city depends. Then the third one, of course, is sparking city commitments to do those interventions. So we can map them, but then who do we need to bring to the table so that this actually happens? Then we show what are the concrete projects, and then, of course, most of these interventions, in this case, establishing a committee doesn't need financial resources, more of a human resources approach. But if it needs financial resources, the project that we identify, then we bring together the whole of society to support the city in this transition. A lot of questions in this agenda. These steps that I'm sharing here that we're running with what we call the champion cities in our Nature Positive Cities program have raised a lot of questions. This is an emerging agenda where we have found that not only there are questions, but very different challenges in terms of, again, the science-based approach. Is a very interesting concept, is a very interesting commitment from cities, but we need universities to support, we need the academia, we need the civil society to support this, not only to bring science-based approach to measure the progress, but also to increase the impact through the work of other organizations. Again, we don't want these to become a burden for cities and local governments. We want these to be a project that involves civil society, that involves private sector, and it becomes, because when we talk about cities, it's a very general and ethereal concept. When we say there has to be nature-positive cities, who is the responsible for that? Is it the local government, or is it the private sector? In general, it's assumed that it's the local government, but a city is a very complex layer of different responsibilities and asset owners, and we need to start assigning responsibilities in this transition. So again, these are some open questions that we have that we're trying to resolve. This initiative, the Nature Positive Cities Initiative, is built through a big community that is called the Global Commission on Nature Positive Cities. I don't have it here, but I can share If you go to nature-positive-cities.org, you can see more about this project, the recent report that we launched in terms of establishing the guidelines and the attributes and the definition of a nature-positive city, and it explains what is the role also of the Global Commission. We have a Global Commission that is comprised by 5 mayors of the 5 pilot cities of this initiative that we expect to expand in the next year, but we started with 5 mayors that were committed to incorporate and to implement and to pilot this approach, this 5 steps approach. San Francisco in the United States, Barranquilla in Colombia, Belém do Pará in Brazil, which is the host city of the COP30. So the mayor of Belém do Pará in Brazil, and Brazil is this year the president of the G20. But the government of Pará in Brazil wanted to work with the World Economic Forum in the run-up for COP30. There is a lot of investment happening in the city to prepare the city to host this big COP of more than 15,000 people coming to a small city, a port city. And the carrying capacity of this city that is in the Amazon has to be measured and has to be taken into account when preparing the city for such a big event. So we're working with them to understand how is the city now, what is the layout of the city, and how can we plan for an urban development that has been accelerated because of the preparation of the COP, and work with very clear and concrete environmental standards, net zero, nature positive, avoid emissions, avoid encroachment of valuable areas, avoid deforestation and land use change, and of course, have a reciprocity not only with the environment but with the society. We don't want to generate gentrification in the city where big Congress halls are built and then the local population is affected. So it's a process and it's accelerated because COP30 is happening next year. But this is why they also joined this process of measuring their transition and avoiding nature, a negative impact on nature in the preparation for COP30. Then we have Durban in South Africa and Incheon, which is the metropolitan area of Seoul in Korea. All of these 5 cities are port cities. So not only they share the commitment to be nature positive, but they also share different and similar challenges. They are suffering with flooding events, environmental hazards. Again, we want to understand with them how nature can become the greatest solution for urban resilience. They are port cities that are expanding because of trade agreements of Europe with the Latin American Mercosur. In the case of Durban, with the Rail and Road Initiative from China, is a port city that is expanding super fast. So how this port expansion and the imports or the trade expansion in the city is affecting biodiversity, and how can we combine efforts with other sectors such as the trade sector and the port commissions, so that we can ensure that the city is on track, both with climate targets and nature targets. So again, these are open questions. I don't want to stop here because maybe we can start more of a conversation and not this monologue. But again, what kind of governance arrangement can enable this nature-positive transition? I already mentioned some examples where we need to start gathering more examples. How can cities bridge the data gap to effectively plan and implement nature-positive initiatives? Data is fundamental, is an enabler here, because if we don't start with a baseline, we can't measure a progression, we can't measure progress, we can't measure transition. So how are we gathering data? How are we establishing targets based on that data? This is a constant question that we're asking. And of course, there is very interesting already examples on how integrated platforms for data management and urban development planning can support this process of tracking and setting targets. What is the funding gap for nature, and which mechanisms are most suited to finance nature-positive projects in cities? Again, I have sometimes a very contentious approach to the funding gap, because yes, there's a funding gap for nature, but there's also an opportunity to redirect funds that exist that can benefit the nature agenda. We don't necessarily need more money, more funding. We can redirect funding that is going to different sectors, and those sectors can really change the course of the impact of nature. So there are some projects that we can definitely call nature positive. Again, it's not just about increasing green areas. It's not only about managing the waterfront of a city. Nature positive can be, for example, effective and efficient urban mobility. If we manage, for example, in a city that is expanding super fast in the global south to provide efficient transport and an efficient transport system, we are avoiding the urban sprawl. We are avoiding new neighborhoods to be developed close to the business area, close to the business districts. If we manage to provide to the citizens an easy way to get from one place to another, an easy way to commute, we can afford and we can control the urban sprawl. We can control the way the cities emerge informally, responding to challenges such as mobility. So a nature-positive project can definitely be a transport project. It doesn't have to be connected with green areas. A housing project can be nature-positive. If we control urban sprawl, if we manage to retrofit old neighborhoods and buildings and to put housing in there instead of developing new houses elsewhere in previously protected areas, this is nature-positive. Another interesting project is in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a city that is very extensive. More than 15% of the city is parking lots. How do we repurpose those parking lots so that they become green areas? How do we work with the transportation and the urban planning department so that some areas can be released for nature? This is also nature positive. So again, it's trying to develop a taxonomy of projects that are not only in charge of the environmental area of a city. Some projects can have a positive outcome for nature, being from other sectors, and this we call nature positive as well. And again, how can we better engage the private sector to finance those projects? After me, there are some companies that are going to present as well their efforts, and I think that bridging those efforts and facilitating the conversation between the private sector efforts towards nature and the willingness of cities to really incorporate a plan and a restorative plan towards nature is fundamental for us. So I'm going to stop here with another beautiful bird. But I want to open for questions, for comments. I look forward to speaking more one-on-one with you later on. I don't like this just to be a monologue. But again, I'm very humbled to see that in this room so many people are doing already nature-positive things. This is a new buzzword, but all of us have been working for years in these topics. So it's just a matter of realigning our efforts and basically showing that this contributes to this new concept, but it's not at all reinventing an agenda. So thank you very much.